And welcome everyone to another incredible opportunity for learning and sharing during National Accessibility Week. It's hard to believe there's only 2 days left in our conference, and one of the highlights of the entire week that I've been waiting for is our guest this morning. In particular, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Bill Wilkerson. Bill is a founding fellow of the Institute of Mental Health at the University of British Columbia. He served as the general chairman of the US-Canada Forum on Mental Health and Productivity. And in September 2014, he co-chaired a meeting of top US businesses and military leaders in Denver, Colorado on suicide prevention. In 1998, Bill also co-founded the Global Business and Economic Roundtable on Addiction and Mental Health, which he's led for 13 years, closing its doors to launch Mental Health International in order to mobilize European corporations in a campaign to reduce the impact of depression in workplaces across Europe. Bill now serves as chairman of the European Business Leadership Forum for Workplace Mental Health and its campaign to target the impact of depression. And he has traveled to 20 European capitals in 24 months to recruit major employers with more than 1.5 million employees in an unprecedented business-led campaign. The forum, short name Target, produced a European business charter and 6 pilot projects to test management practices aimed at reducing risk and disablement associated with chronic job stress and depression. Bill has spoken widely, not only to business and scientific organizations, but to caregivers, teachers, police, military, and first responders across Canada, the US, and of course now Europe. He was the one and only sworn civilian advisor to the RCMP on mental health issues facing our national police force. A huge issue now. Couldn't be more important to have Bill here. His professional career spans business, journalism, broadcasting, the arts, major league sports, and government service. On November 20th, 2015, McMaster University conferred on Bill an honorary doctorate of laws, its highest recognition for his work in the mental health field since 1998. Welcome to our National Accessibility Week, my good friend, Dr. Bill Wilkerson. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you so much, Tova. It's just great to see you. I kind of quivered. Your voice is so powerful and so clear. And to have you speak my biography made me nervous. Isn't that a funny reaction to have?
It's a very funny reaction. I always tell people you don't want to be on while I read a bio because it feels awkward. Like you're a bit of a narcissist, and I am, so I try not to show it too often. Yeah. Back to you,
well,
Bill.
I'm thrilled to death to be part of your week around accessibility and the reachAbility series of events you have pulled together. I want to make one quick comment. I'm at home, as we all are, and I have a little poodle who tends to get his nose into trouble all the time. Now, I've got the door closed, but I can't promise we won't have a little creature running around here anytime now and getting in the way of my remarks. So I apologize in advance on his behalf.
We're all hoping the poodle shows up now. You do know that, Bill. It's going to be the best outtake. You know all these videos with 20 million hits where the guy's trying to do business and, the dog crying on his face. Those are the winners, Bill. This could be our biggest hit yet for National Accessibility Week.
There's a real possibility of that taking place.
More importantly, Bill, we're really pleased to give you the stage to give us an overview of what you've discovered in this research, your overview, the fact that we are in this unusual time. I know that you're going to be touching on that as well. So I'm going to get out of the way, give the folks who are really here to hear something incredible of what's going on, what we need to do. I love how proactive you are, Bill. And I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to hold off till afterward and come back and let our viewers know they'll also have questions. We'll be happy to take them as well. Sound good?
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so very much.
Bill Wilkerson. Thank you, Bill.
Toodaloo for now. Thank you so much, Tova. I'm pleased to be here, to put it mildly. I have nothing but admiration for the work that the association does, the importance of the annual week dedicated to the access that all of us, regardless of the challenges we live with as individuals, the access that all of us must and should and will have as in order to fulfill our lives. There is nothing more straightforwardly truthful and honest about the way in which we proceed as a community than ensuring that there is an accessible way of life for all. I also want to reflect just for a second, if I may, on Nova Scotia. The province and the people of this beautiful land have been through a great trauma, and our heart goes out to you. And I know those are words, but they're meant and they're genuine, I assure you. And your tragedy really has been ours as a nation whole and as a society. And really in that light, I think it's safe to say we are all Nova Scotians as you navigate the aftermath of the great tragedy behind you. The other part of it, of course, is that all of us in this world now are facing a calamitous pandemic, which has put at risk human life, the economy of communities and nations, and the hopes and dreams of people. I think, though, that we can and should remind ourselves that hope is never far away if we will look for it and see it for what it is. And that is always the possibility of love between and among us and reaching out to each other. This is a time when accessibility pertains to us all, irrespective of who we are and the manner in which we conduct our lives and the challenges we bear in so doing. So we're here, the phrase which I have grown very fond of, we're all in this together. We have to make that real coming out of this period of time, which we're not there yet, but will be. We have to make sure that there is a real concrete element of human compassion and human cooperation and human opportunity. And my remarks this morning tie together some of these issues as we, as a society, pandemic aside for a moment, however, how does one really do that? Artificial intelligence and its effect on human beings is really the gist of what I want to discuss this morning. And I'm going to introduce a phrase which is a bit of a play on what we've been heard about as really a phrase describing a new way of life called social distancing. As we move forward in the weeks and months ahead, I think we need another phrase to begin to replace that one. Not to get in the way of the important clinical and social purposes of social distancing, but to begin to shift our thinking to the aftermath and the period to come. And I'd like to use the phrase social detailing. I think we should begin now to start looking at the ways in which we can begin to adapt our institutions, our practices, our lives, our friendships, so that we have a more detailed view of the plight and the opportunities and the needs of others. I think that is a fundamental pretext upon which to go forward from these difficult times. We have, about a year ago, I guess it is now, we put out a report called Of Two Minds, One Human and One Not. And this was the phrase we used to open the discussion around mental health in the era of artificial intelligence. And it had a question posed at the end of that phrase of two minds. Can we keep them both healthy, the human mind and the mind that is not human? Can we keep them both healthy? And I must say to you, that's very unclear. And I think we need to dedicate ourselves in all of our various facets of life, clinical, business, government, societal, to making sure that this new technology, and this is a different kind of new technology, is not going to become, through unintended consequence, the worst of two worlds, but in fact, the better of two worlds. And those two worlds will require us, as this new technology unfolds, to be very clear that the human being is the supreme person in workplaces of today and must be in workplaces of tomorrow. And yes, there will be robots in greater numbers, but they are still machines, not people. And I encourage those in the technology design business to be very careful about the degree to which they replicate human function, because it can become an unintended consequence that we will begin to traverse and intrude upon what we value of ourselves as human beings. The great scientist, the great Canadian scientist, Dr. Alan Bernstein, chairs the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, and they are developing an artificial intelligence strategy for Canada. At my urging, and God bless him for this, he's put mental health into that strategy to ensure that this country's overall approach will take into account both the risks and the possibilities. And there are a lot of good things that could come out of all this, are recognized, and that people's vulnerabilities are observed and accounted for and accommodated as new technology of this nature comes into our midst. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, it's a range of technologies which we're already seeing. If you type in an address on the email on your computer, if it's a name that you've used before, you'll notice it fills it in itself before you've finished. That happens all the time. And then we have the voice coming over and saying, how can I help? The one is a predictive dimension of artificial intelligence, and the other is a robotic demonstration. And there are a range of applications that some are colloquial in the sense that they're just for everyday use, and some are quite profound. And I'll discuss those in a minute, because I do not want to imply that artificial intelligence needs to be seen as a bad thing. It's got some great potential and some good things to offer us if we allow it to happen that way. The report itself was written to encourage leaders in government and business to take into account the human implications of these new technologies. And we've cited it as relevant to mental health because there is the risk that artificial intelligence, if it's rapidly infused and infused on a grand scale, can be a super source, a superpower of chronic stress. And chronic stress is the #1 risk factor for mental ill health. Make no mistake about that. When we look for the cause of mental illness, it's not simple. It's not entirely clear, but we know this much. A big part of it is how we treat each other. A big part of it is how we conduct our society and our economy, and how opportunity is shared. Human interaction is a big part of the human experience, and it's a big part on the negative side of the risk factors associated with mental ill health. And I think that's important to understand, that science tells us there's 2 combining factors that create mental ill health. One is a genetic dynamic, which we don't fully grasp. And the other are the lives and we live, the environments in which we live and work, for good or ill. I think also that we're surrounded by 2 other major revolutions going on that can affect and will affect the capacity of people to enjoy and to fulfill their lives. And one is a thing called genomics, which is a dimension of dealing with our knowledge of the genome within us, our blueprint. The other is genetics, which is the science that has to do with what we already know, but what is it doing for us or against us? And these are changing a lot of things for the good. For example, the fact that we have a genetic picture of the genome means that we also now have our first understanding at the molecular level of where and how some of these conditions we call mental illness develop and materialize. And this is going to be ultimately the way in which we find the solutions, real solutions, not just treatments that work or may work or work sometimes, but real solutions to reduce the burden dramatically in the next years to come. Let me paint the picture, first of all, before I get into the technology questions. Let me paint the picture of mental health and mental ill health that defines really the nature of the challenge in front of us. There are 10 characteristics of the mental health crisis, if I can use that phrase, and I only mention it because it seems to me that we have inadequate response so far to the access to care and the needed care to help people through these experiences. And when we have a need that is so evident and so obvious, but inadequate care everywhere in response to it, despite the heightening of awareness, despite the popularity of the topic compared to where it was 10 years ago, despite all of that, we still lack adequate care, medical care. There's going to be changes in that regard for the good, I'm confident, and in the shorter rather than the eventual term. But here are the characteristics. First of all, the early age of onset. These are conditions that begin in childhood. They may not materialize symptomatically till later in life, but that's where they start. Second, mental illnesses can have a disabling and even deadly effect. And that is not just in reference to the desperation that can flow out of depression, leading to suicidal thought or action, but in fact, the complications that depression imposes upon our cardiovascular health and to the course of diabetes and Parkinson's disease. We don't understand truly what that is. It isn't just that we're feeling badly, therefore everything else is worse. There is a basis for that yet to be discovered. We have these obsolete methods of diagnosis. I alluded to that in Form the Care. It's where people say, here's what I feel, and then we deduce what they're going through as a diagnostic category. This is the only field of medicine that does things that way. We got to get past it. As a result, we've had a stagnation of new treatments, but that too is changing. And one of the most interesting and promising courses is going to be the adaptation of ketamine. Yes, psychedelic drugs in the old days has been approved in the United States and Canada for development and may bring the treatment of depression down to a matter of days for relief, not weeks and months, if ever. The lack of routine accessibility to ongoing social and economic supports. That is part of the accessibility equation. The concentration of these conditions as they mature are among men and women in their prime years of work, and thus the heavy impact on the economy and on businesses, and the ineffective rise of the comorbidities I just mentioned, and we need standards for that. The opportunity, of course, in my judgment at least, is all about prevention. And secondary prevention if necessary, but prevention. And that is going to be my next, and perhaps my going away, because I can't do these things forever, but I'm going to try to get one more big show in my experience on this topic. And that's all about prevention. How can that happen? How can the symptoms be prevented, the disability be prevented, the early death be prevented, the suffering be prevented? The fear and isolation, how can these be prevented? We don't have to find a cure for the illness to deal with those things and to prevent these conditions. I live with asthma. When I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble every summer through the fall with ragweed and allergies, and asthma was often a source of early death. Nowadays, it's simply another chronic thing you have to live with, but I haven't had an asthma attack in 40 years. That's where depression will end up. I'm convinced of it. If it has to happen at all, it's going to be a routine chronic illness that can be treated and forgotten about, except to do what is required to maintain your health. The interesting dimension of mental health or brain health, brain-based mental health on one hand, new technology on the other, coming in between those two poles, if you will, is a confluence or a convergence of two other factors. One is, in this world we live in this digital world, most new jobs increasingly are going to demand brain skills, cerebral skill sets, not manual skills. Repetitive work is going to go out the window. And that is part of the AI effect. That doesn't necessarily mean, if we do it properly, that the jobs that people hold have to go away. They can be repurposed and retrained, and as the new phrase, reskilled, and should be. But that job uncertainty is part of the risk to mental well-being. And I think the other part of this, though, is that if we are an economy that demands brain skills more than manual skills, we're still using, we will be using our ability to be creative, innovative, our ability to relate well to others. Customer service will be a big deal. That defines this thing we call a brain economy. At the same time, a brain-based disorder called depression is taking more people off work today than any other condition, and has been doing so since I got involved in these issues. That's some 20 years ago. So we haven't made a lot of headway on that yet. I think the point of it all is that change as manifest in artificial intelligence can and must be managed. Can and must be managed. If it is dropped like a bomb, changing jobs, throwing people out of work, creating a blizzard of uncertainty across the economy, then artificial intelligence will be a bad thing for society. That need not happen. And it will require conscious intent by institutions, including business and government, small business, big business, institutions of higher learning, the technology community itself, to ensure that they don't create vehicles that have nothing but grief for people. But at the same time, we have to be cautious and aware that the bad things of technology are rooted in history. So we have to be careful. The Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, for example, is examining, as part of its mission to develop a national strategy in artificial intelligence, as to its effect on everyday life. And I'll pause here because I'm one of the great protagonists against social media in its current form. Yes, I'm not that skilled in it anyway, and technology has never made me personally comfortable, but with that bias aside, I have a very strong view of the fact that social media, Facebook, Twitter, are doing things for us that outweigh the things, or against us, that outweigh the things they are doing for us. I also want to underscore this. iPhones, cell phones in the current form, texting, are designed to create more than a habit, but an addiction. They are designed like cigarettes were designed, to become habitual. And I like to say to the neuroscientists out there who are working with the high-tech industry to help design these devices to appeal to that part of the brain where craving emanates, leading to addictive behavior. I'd like to ask you to rethink your purpose and the deployment of your scientific knowledge for such a purpose. And it is something that I think the industry, the profession itself, should look into. Just as professional scientists help cigarette companies design cigarettes to create addictions that led to cancer and other diseases that have taken millions of lives, we're doing the same thing with some of the social media devices around us today. The Treasury Board of Canada has taken a very proper position with regard to artificial intelligence, and it has made it a policy inside the government that it must be used in a manner that does not cause physical and mental harms. There must not be discriminatory applications. And here's a dimension of this issue that I want to underscore for purposes of the accessibility community. These new technologies can learn discriminatory behavior. We don't need that. That's running too deep in the original brain that we know about, the human brain. And these devices, these technologies, which are potentially are claimed to be based upon knowledge of the human brain and therefore replicating how the brain works, but inside these machines, if we don't comprehend the fact that machines can learn by rote and repetition and are, through algorithms, are doing so today, they can learn discriminatory behavior and be deployed for those purposes. A robot can watch all those coming into a building and be taught to isolate those that they don't want to see come through the door. Now, those are rare. I'm not saying they're out there today. I'm saying it's possible. And with what's going on in the United States and the statement made at the outset of this program this morning with regard to the brutality of police against Black Americans, I think we have to be double down to ensure that the humanity of this world is reaffirmed, to ensure that technology is there to supplement people and support people and to create new job opportunities, not to displace people and eliminate existing employment. The famous Institute for Life in the United States, Stephen Hawking was a member, has signatories from 90 countries with a pledge for world safety and a vow never to develop killer robots. Sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? Things of science fiction, but those are the experts and believers in the technology and potential value of it, and they're warning us of that at this time. Artificial intelligence has a whole other face. It will facilitate the testing of models of psychiatric illness and help us understand where and why these conditions are happening. And that will open the door to undreamed of opportunities for prevention. And I think that we should be aware that the good sides need not take a backseat to the bad if we are aware of both. What they call machine-brain coupling experiments in the United States foresee new ways to treat non-congenital blindness. A thing called augmented reality is being used to develop therapies for children living with autism. New IBM research is using artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify instances of schizophrenia with 74% accuracy, which means this very devastating disease has a chance of being detected much earlier. And like all things, the earlier, the better. There's a new discipline called computational psychiatry. You know, and being not a very technical person myself, terms like that always give me a pause, but there it is. It will help psychiatrists diagnose conditions which they can't see with an X-ray. The overarching goal of the National Institute for Mental Health in the United States is one we can celebrate, and that is the using of technology to identify and validate biological markers of mental illness in order to target their prevention and treatment. I have just joined the board of a public company that is developing ketamine for the purposes I mentioned a moment ago. And what a dream to come true there. It's a pending revolution in defeating this invasive condition. All in all, I guess what we're trying to articulate, or what I'm trying to articulate, is that we need balance between artificial intelligence and its effects. And it comes right through the question of stress. Stress is a term that is used so routinely and so commonly that it almost has lost its meaning in the everyday sense of things. I'm stressed out. Well, we all are. That's very stressful. Yeah, well, I had that too. The fact is that stress means your body is at war with itself based upon external fear, trauma, uncertainty, frustration. Stress is overwhelmingly the most proficient and most common cause of mental illness. And the containment of stress lies within our power to achieve. So don't look always for the health professional to reduce the effects of mental illness. Look within the community. Look within ourselves. How we treat each other. How we look at a child and help that child realize there's a future to be had, not to make that child fear and go into a adolescence of fear. We need a special focus in this day, what I call Generation 1. These are the adolescents becoming adults who are among the most stressed and depressed of their generation we've seen yet, except these are smart, intelligent people, at the same time aware, more aware perhaps than their predecessors. They're the first generation to grow into a world where climate change hangs over the future. They're the first to grow into a world now with the effects of a pandemic that will last. The first to grow into a world, however, with more knowledge about the need for human attachment and accessibility to opportunity and to life than any generation before. When I received the doctorate from McMaster, I gave the convocation speech, and I was asked to address families in the audience, 2,000 people, who had lost 2 sons and 2 daughters to suicide in that academic year, and therefore they were there in their child's name, but the child was absent and gone. Well, this new Generation 1 can be, through its knowledge and its compassion and its understanding, the first generation to actually begin the pragmatic work to prevent suicide. Suicide is preventable, but it is now the leading cause of violent death in the world today. Unemployment goes up 1%, suicide takes a life. 1 and 1. So we've got work to do in that regard, and this is where artificial intelligence can help. Can help us understand and can help us reach people quickly before the concern or the death or the decision to harm oneself takes over. And there's a firm treating people accessing care virtually now. Telemedicine, I think, is going to be a great boot for mental health care. And mental health care can be dramatically improved through the use of artificial intelligence and telemedicine at the heart of that. All in all, I think that what we face most significantly, most specifically, and what we must be careful about in design is the unintended consequence of artificial intelligence. Therefore, I have proposed to the Government of Canada, and I'm pushing in other quarters, for a set of national standards regarding nomenclature. I've heard scientists refer no longer to people, but to sentient beings. I say to those scientists, we are people, not sentient beings, although the term is a legitimate description of our awareness. We have a lot of work to do in that regard, national standards. We got to understand it. So I encourage you, for those of you who are hearing me, learn about artificial intelligence. Don't fear it. Learn about it. Talk to your employer about it. Where does it fit in your business, in your workplace, in your future? And I think in the end, it can be something which affirms the supremacy of the human factor at work rather than put that factor, that person, at risk. And I think in that respect, we have a whole lot to do with respect to our use of social media and technology today. And I hope coming out of this pandemic that we will find in ourselves and in our institutions, and we will begin to push for this as individuals and as groups, that we need to be accessible to alternatives that diffuse and downplay the role of social media in our lives. Artificial intelligence and mental health are connected by the questions of uncertainty that the latter projects into the former. They are also connected by the opportunity that artificial intelligence will present us with to actually solve the problems associated with mental health difficulties, both clinically and socially. So I'm not here to say artificial intelligence is a bad thing. I'm saying it must be understood, so go out and get your knowledge about it, understand it. And I think what is important in that regard is to understand how wrong forecasters have been about the use of the internet. Remember, it was supposed to be the great unifier? I don't think so. Remember, the blogs were supposed to carve away bad information and mistrust? That hasn't happened. So unintended consequence is the bridge too far. We have to have this stuff understood by the average person in their everyday lives and not just look at it and say, well, that's that and that's the way it is. Find out about it, ask your employer about it, and develop an artificial intelligence ethic, if you will, or program or platform of education and learning in the days ahead as the workplaces become animated once again. Mental health is a very human thing. Mental illness, equally so. You know, if we weren't human beings, we wouldn't suffer those conditions. Those are uniquely human experiences, born of uniquely human concerns and worries and apprehensions. And at the same time, the uniquely human qualities of love and support and recognition of the value of others, and the universal accessibility of us all as this pandemic recedes and some degree of normalcy comes within sight once again. Let us all focus on the humanity that we embody, the humanity that we live by and live through, and mostly the humanity we must share at times of new technology or times just to feel the quiet breeze of an early evening. Humanity is now the most vital asset we have both economically, socially, and otherwise. I encourage you to discover that, and if necessary, rediscover that in your own life. Thank you so very much. I really enjoy being here, even at long distance. Thank you.
I'm back. I hope you can see and hear me, Bill, because I'm chomping at the bit with a couple of questions. So thank you so much for that presentation and your patience during that pace where we had some dead air. Bill, you know, as a person who lives with mental illness or a mental disability, health disability, I've always seen it as really the last taboo in the workplace in terms of discussion of it and being comfortable discussing it. That's something I see in my education with employers. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, from your perspective, having been a leader in this field for so long, no offense, how has stigma evolved? And, you know, you always told me this great story about how we used to view other disabilities and how far we've come. And I just thought it was so powerful in terms of, for me, the visual. I wondered if you could share for us how you've seen the evolution of stigma as it relates to mental health challenges.
Sure thing. I think the difficulty over the years has been that certain images of mental illness have been embedded in our culture, in our upbringings, in our experiences. Terms like crazy, or he's off his meds, or phrases which imply some degree of responsibility of the person themselves for what may be ailing them. The nomenclature of mental illness and mental health must change. As I just said to the other questioner, mental illness, I think, is hopelessly stigmatized. I don't think there's anything coming back from that. I would prefer to be talking about other descriptions, which I have yet to really come to terms with. The psychiatric community, by the way, agrees with that, with me on that there should be new language. And I would like to work on that this year. The stigma began in three pockets. One, the view that mental illness was a source of violence in the world today. Wrong. The view that somebody who acts crazy is crazy. Wrong. Bad behavior has nothing to do with mental illness in 99 out of 100 cases. All those terrible shootings in the United States, for example, did not involve some declared form of mental illness. The terrible tragedy in Nova Scotia, by what have I been able to ascertain, was not triggered by mental illness. And here's the point. Some of us are born like some of us are 6 feet tall, and some of us are 5'5". Some of us have blue eyes. Some of us have gray eyes. That is the same thing with regard to the way some of us emerge in life: hostile, prone to violence, resentful, isolated. And it is not a form of illness. Being a psychopath is not a form of mental illness. It's the way that person is. So stigma came from violence. Stigma also was embedded in the thinking of the church for so many eons. It used to be that if a person took their own life, they could not be buried in the Catholic cemetery. They could not have the final rites of the church if they took their own lives. And that was a very misplaced view, but it penetrated the way people saw it. And finally, it showed also up through our culture and the comical nature of psychiatrists portrayed on television and in movies. You remember the film Harvey? Some people might not. It was a big tall rabbit.
James Stewart, look it up. It was a movie.
And the thing about it is that James Stewart, because he had this pal, this big tall rabbit, was put in a mental health institution that was a joke. It was everybody there was silly. The psychiatrists were loopier than anyone else, and so there's that came through. And I think the common denominator to all of that is fear. I mentioned the story I told you when I was a kid. Infantile paralysis, which became more commonly known as polio, was rampant in the 50s. It was a scary thing, and you had to put a sign on the front door of your house if somebody inside had it. So we used to walk around the block, like 10 blocks if necessary, not to pass that house. And the kid that came through that was probably disabled as a result, lost their ability to walk. That was a common occurrence in those days. And they lived with that stigma the rest of their life. One of the great stories of fighting stigma was the story of the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, who suffered polio and was crippled by it. And he showed that it didn't have to keep you back. And as the years went by and as the cure, the vaccine for polio became available, it was removed as a source of fear. Fear is at the heart of so much of the stigmatization of mental illness.
I remember you telling me in that story that people would literally drive blocks around just not to drive on the same street as someone who lived with polio. It was that stigmatized. So there is hope for those of us living with whether brain health challenges.
Yeah, and let me just before you go on, I want to underscore that point you're just making, Tova, is that there's hope. There's also been tremendous gains. Some of us feel it individually that we're isolated or that we are fearing that we're looked upon differently. But on a mass scale, since we started working on this stuff in the late 90s, the openness and the generation one I spoke of in my remarks, that community is growing up into adulthood, talking openly about this stuff and not holding it against each other for feeling down in the dumps. And knowing that that's a natural human experience. And that's the point I'd love to reach your conference audience, is that these are the elements of our humanity, not the elements of our separation from our humanity. And we can live with that better if we understand that.
You know, you come up, you're really good at coming up with great terms. I noticed that. So I'm looking forward to some of the new ones you're coming up with. One of the terms that you use, no, it's true, because we were talking, and, you know, even today, as fast as things are happening, Bill comes up with a better kind of way of describing. For instance, we're talking a lot about social distancing now with our COVID world. And Bill, you and I were talking about social detailing. Could you just expound on that for folks? Because I think we're going to start a trend here.
Yeah. Well, I think social detailing should become something that replaces social distancing. But I got to emphasize, I'm not saying let's not observe social distancing rules. I'm not saying that. But
got it. We'll put a disclaimer up. He's not saying
right across my head what I'm not saying. But what I am saying is that let's take the social distancing and all that went into the idea of being separate but together in other ways, and let's move that across the street and begin to think about the ways in which we can do in detail, in our detailed everyday lives, look after each other better and keep up some of those habits. And when I say to a kid, what's your social detailing plan? I want that kid to be able to say, well, I want to work out a way to make sure that those elderly folks down the street don't have to keep trying to shove their walk. Oh, that's a good social detailing plan. But it's detail, it's illustrations, one-offs if necessary. It doesn't have to be a big fancy plan. Social detailing will be those details coming out of this pandemic that exhibit and reflect and articulate our love for each other.
And I can't think of a better way, even though I have a million questions. I want to end on that note because it's such a powerful note, and I couldn't have wrapped it up with the ribbon better. Bill, I'm a little nervous to hear that you're saying the word last, not next focus. So I'm not going to press you on it, but you know I don't want you going anywhere. But can you tell us a little bit about that work around prevention of mental health? That's going to be your next project before I let you go.
Sure. And I've got a lot of really top people who actually know things about science, as opposed to me, who I read things about science and then translate it. We want to say that the time has come for us to say straightforwardly that we're out here to find a cure, but people get uncomfortable with that word cure because they say, well, that's a false hope. So I'm saying, all right, well, let's call it prevention. We are going to find new drugs. Ketamine has great hope, and that's why I joined this board of this company, that we know that 50% at least of the risk factors are to do with social environments and work environments. We can control those pressures and those stressors that contribute to the development of this stuff. 3, we know that these conditions develop in youth, in childhood, really. So we know that as part of the upbringing of a child, our ability to ensure that that child is supported and cared for in a way, and if they're showing tendencies toward nervousness, which will happen in infancy, by the way, that we don't just take it as, well, they'll grow out of that. We observe it, we care, and you look at it as almost a nutritional thing, that we have to make sure that we have enough social nutrients taken from our experiences as we grow older, and the manifestation of those symptoms need not happen. And we see also the investment in research, and not just neuroscientific research that'll produce a result 25 years from now, but real-time research that demonstrates how we can prevent chronic job stress. That's enemy number 1, in my opinion.
I have to tell you, Bill, I don't have a lot of questions from people, but what I do have is comments like beautiful insights. Thank you, doctor. So interesting. I'm going to be reading Bill's paper. We posted, by the way, the link to your paper.
Oh, that's great.
Bill Wilkerson, we can't say enough except to thank you for joining National Accessibility Week here in Nova Scotia and across Canada. I look forward to speaking to you very soon on some of these exciting things you're working on all the time.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and to all of those who are part of this program, I congratulate you, I salute you, and I love you.